Hello, 022 group. This is Colonel Gallagher, and I'm coming from my home, courtesy of the current situation. I hope you're doing okay, and I hope your family's doing okay. Last left off and told you we're going to jump to the Pacific, and I'm going to try to get two battles in, but I'm going to hopefully maybe just get one. I want to keep this really short, and this would be Iwo Jima. We're coming up on something. It's the idea of valor and uh, valor and virtue. Gosh. So there's an old phrase in Iwo Jima said by Admiral Nimitz, the overseer of the operation, and it was uncommon valor was a common virtue, and that's a very important idea. And as we go through the horrors of Iwo Jima, we see the idea of the Marines, especially, but it's really the 10th Army that's going to take place in this. But the Marines are the ones hitting the beaches. And this is a terrible ordeal for the Marines. Iwo Jima is a small volcanic island, about 750 miles from Japan, and the whole idea is to get closer to Japan. Now, last time we were in the Pacific, we talked to Marianas, and we talked about the long-range bombing campaign. Marianas Islands now, that's nice. The long-range bombing's okay, but it's not efficient enough and effective enough. Iwo Jima, the whole goal of taking this little island, this godforsaken island, as the Marines keep looking at this thing and thinking, what the heck is this about? Is really twofold. One is it's one of those outside perimeters of defenses the Japanese are using. So you have to kind of take them off the island to gain control of it. But the real point of it, the whole point of it, is for an air base. And so the Japanese taking them off Iwo Jima, now what happens, the Americans are going to begin bombing Japan on a much more regular basis and a regular schedule. And the hopes is to bring the end to the war quickly. Now, this is in 1945. Iwo Jima began February 19th, 1945. Would go to March 26th. Here's March 27th. It would go and end March 26th, 1945. Interesting thing, when you get into the Battle of Iwo Jima, the two commanders, the Japanese commander and the American commander, would both die at this battle. It's a horrifying ordeal for both the Americans and the Japanese, obviously. The Japanese hold the island with about 21,000 soldiers, and we'll get to in a minute what the Japanese have in mind. The Americans approached the island, and what they began to do is they had an air assault. They would go in and bomb the island for about 2 months. Okay, 2 months siege with aerial bombardments. Okay, then the Navy pulled up and unleashed its guns for 3 days. Okay, so the island's been completely shelled, and the thought is this is devastating. All of them, they're dead and or maybe even left the island. So this is the hope of it. So when they land on the beaches, they won't go through the horrors that the Marines had endured in the previous engagements, such as the one the Marianas we left off with last time. And so anyway, the Japanese now after the shelling are fine. Kobayashi, the Japanese commander on the island, has taken painful preparations in order for the Japanese to dig into the island. That leads to one Marine officer to finally say, as you go through the Battle of Iwo Jima, the Japanese were not on the island, they were in the island, and he's exactly right. It's an unbelievable trench network, unbelievable tunnel network they've had. These fortifications, when we get to Suribachi, the mountain that the Marines had to take, is unbelievable because they have these steel doors. It's very fortified, and they're just shelling the Marines. What the Japanese did and what Kobayashi wanted is he goaded the Marines in, he goaded the Army in. He wants them to land on the beaches, okay, on this volcanic rock beach front, and he wants them to line up. And then once they get into position, he's going to unleash on them. And it's when you read the Marine account, it's fascinating because they point out how eerie it was. They're usually Saipan, Arawa, or anything else. As you move towards the beachheads, you're met with resistance. None of this. It's very quiet. It's very docile and tranquil in this sense. But then the Japanese opened up. Once all this is in place, once everything's there, and the Marines are in this compact area, they start letting them have it. And from there, on day one, you have 2,500 casualties. This is something the Marines would definitely remember in their history. So this battle, February to March, this is long. This is over a month, and this is a horrifying close quarters combat. And with the Marines, what drove them nuts is as you think you clear out an area, Okay, all of a sudden the Japanese would pop back up and reoccupy, and this was them, the idea of the Japanese in caves. This is the bunker cave mentality, as one historian called it, and it's very true to that. Finally, after these 30,000 Marines are on the island, a reserve group's going to come up, the Third Marines, and it's going to add to a full force of end up being 70,000 Americans involved in Iwo Jima. The Japanese had 21,000 once again. The Japanese begin this idea and this process of these night raids, and this is meant to try to keep the Americans off balance. So it's a horrifying. And there's one instance, by the way, in Iwo Jima where the Marines are engaged in the fighting, and it's in early March, if I remember correctly. And they're kind of, debating the idea, what in the heck are we doing at this terrible loss? What's this really about? And this plane comes back from the long range bombing campaign, and it crashes down in Iwo Jima. It's been hit and it runs out of fuel, if I remember correctly. But because this plane goes down, it then clicks. This is really the mission. You want this war to end, you have to go forward. The guy who ends up losing the most, I guess, in the combat situation, is the overall commander of the Americans on Iwo Jima. He died near the very end of the days of the battle, March 25th, if I remember correctly. I might be off a day or two. And his name, I love his name, is Simon Bolivar Buckner. There's a name. So if you're gonna have a kid, I'm giving you a freebie right there. Simon Bolivar, fill in your last name. But Simon Bolivar Buckner is hit with an artillery shell, and so he dies in the last day. Kurabayashi is disagreed by historians of how he died. I've read one account, and this is an interesting account, where he committed suicide, which would not be abnormal in the Japanese fold of things in this war. The second thing is he probably died in one of these last big banzai charges that the Japanese were infamous for. You pick whichever one you like. The bottom line is Kobayashi and Buckner both died. Both commanders died. And so at the end of it, you get done with it, and you have a massive casualty rate for the Americans and a massive casualty rate, obviously, for the Japanese. From my readings, I think you only had like a couple hundred Japanese that survived. This was not abnormal. I think we've looked at the Pacific War enough. I told you I'm going to keep it short. I was going to try to throw Okinawa in. The thing about Okinawa is, after Iwo Jima, you're going to get to Okinawa. Okinawa is 350 miles from Japan, so it's between where Iwo Jima is and Japan. It's an island. It's not part of Japan. It's its own independent place the Japanese had occupied. And Okinawa is critical as a base of operation for the Americans because they're that much closer to the fortress Japan. And so Okinawa is a horrible thing to read about. It's similar to the setup of Iwo Jima. You have the shelling. This goes on. The Americans land. This is the 10th Army in Okinawa. Excuse me. This is the 10th Army in Okinawa. Get it right, Gallagher. And so they're going into Okinawa, and the Marines are landing there as well. And so they land and they travel through Okinawa. And the soldiers write about it. The fragrances are in the air. This is April. Sorry, this is April of 1945 now. And they write home some of them that reminds them of being back home, and it's pleasant, it's wonderful, and the Japanese are bringing them in because the Japanese command had an issue in this case. They were trying to decide what's best to do with the Americans, either to meet them on the beach up front and then blast the daylights out of them, or to do this once again, kind of cave and bunker dig in and let them come up. And they chose the latter. And so now they're goading them back in, getting them into this center part of the island, and then they're going to open up on them. And so there's a sense of false security, I guess, that emerges. It's kind of this sense of relaxation by the Americans, as they are. I mean, in wartime, you don't get much times like this as you're moving from island to island. You expect to see an enemy of this ferocity. But Okinawa is punctuated with a tremendous amount of statistics. And the one thing I want you to know is about 100,000 Japanese end up dying. It's ferocious. That's why when you look at these statistics and this data, it tells you the ferocity of it. It's just god awful. And the Americans have become very effective at using something they call the Japanese fear tremendously. The Zippo, Zippo. This was a Sherman tank,
It was outfitted, okay, with a flamethrower, and the American tank could come up and then shoot this flame into the tanks, into the caves, and this got rid of the cave and bunker issue, okay. And this is something the Japanese didn't like. The other obvious thing is throw a grenade in there. Okay, this is not going to be pleasant for anybody in there, man or animal. Especially caves, we think of the bats now, don't we? But the idea is the Japanese are killed about 100,000 Okinawans and about 12,500 Americans. This is a horrifying experience. The men who fought in Okinawa leave really, really grim tales. The book to read is written by E.B. Sledge, Sledge. He was a Marine, wrote a wonderful book called With the Old Breed. It's a good book. If you ever want to really get this sense of that kind of combat. Okay. The other thing about Okinawa is the Americans experienced a much larger force, this thing called kamikaze. You're going to have, when it's all said and done, I've seen both accounts, and so I'm not sure who to believe. Anywhere between 1,500 kamikazes. Now that's a lot of planes compacted in a small area. And can you imagine being on these ships and you're seeing these planes flying around like flies above you, and all of a sudden they just dive bomb at you. The kamikazes increased. In other words, you get to Okinawa, and this was a dangerous threat to the American ships, obviously. And so the Americans lost a lot of ships. Over 36 ships sunk completely, and about 300 damaged. Okinawa was an unbelievable, huge array, almost similar to the idea when you look at D-Day. This massive armament and armada that's put together in order to, in a way, complete the war. The thought, once again, is reach out to Japan, begin this bombing campaign, which the Americans would very effectively do, and begin to bomb the Japanese with incendiary bombs. Now, real quick, I know what the time is, but the incendiary bombs are problematic for Japan because Japan's got a lot of items made of wood. And so as you continue to drop these incendiary bombs, you begin to see huge escalations in the death rate and lots of fires. If you want to get into this, I know this off the top of my head, about 950,000 Japanese. And these are mainly civilians are going to die from this bombing. This is war being inflicted. The bombing campaign in Europe, no different. When you look at it in this way, in this light, that civilians are now kind of mixed in. And the Japanese and the Germans are now going to feel the full force. The American civilians never experienced this except Pearl Harbor to this degree. And so, with the closing on this, the idea of the idea of victory, okay, but the idea of valor, virtue. And when you think of valor, it means the strength of mind and to be able, under unbelievable circumstances, to endure. So here we are today. And so that's been the American spirit. Bye bye.